You know, I am amazed how many people that already know how to knit are jumping on the arm knitting bandwagon too and wanting to learn. In this specific set of videos, I'm going to use language that you already know as a knitter to take you quickly through the arm knitting technique so you can be banging out projects in 30 minutes just like your friends. Let's get started. Okay, this is arm knitting for people who actually already know how to knit. A lot of people are taking up arm knitting that have never done any kind of yarn crafting before, and to teach them how to do that, I'm basically starting from scratch. But for you guys that already have some knitting skills, this video is an overview for you to pick up the arm knitting techniques in a way that you already understand because you're already a knitter and you already know the language, so you'll be able to pick it up much more quickly now. As we go along, I'm going to let you know the names of the other videos that we have for people with no knitting skills per se. And that way, if you need to go back and look over a specific technique in more depth, you'll know what to look for. But this is arm knitting for knitters, and I'm going to use language that you understand, and I'm going to move along at a pretty quick pace, okay? So let's get started. The easiest way to start with arm knitting is with a longtail cast on. So it's the same cast on you would use for longtail for your knitting needles, but we're going to do it on our arms. Pull off at least a yard and a half before you get started, because as you know, with a longtail, you don't want to get stuck with a short end. So I made a slip knot and I put it onto my right arm. I'm going to cast onto my right arm, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, it doesn't matter. You can cast onto your left if you like, but we're going to go back and forth and use both arms pretty much equally. So handedness shouldn't really matter. Anyway, I've put a slip knot on my right arm. I don't want to make it too tight because I don't want to cut off circulation to my hand. And I also, as I move stitches up, if I'm doing a project with more and more stitches, I don't want it to be so tight up by my elbow, okay? So I put the slip knot on my arm, I snugged it up a little bit, and I'm just going to longtail cast on. So in the same way that you would do it with a knitting needle, you're using your right pointer finger in the same way that you would use your knitting needle. And we're using 3 strands of yarn at a time. So a longtail cast on, just like you would do for knitting, only using your right hand as the knitting needle. Let's see, let's just put 6, I'm going to put 7 stitches on so we can go on from there. Okay, so I have 7 stitches on my right arm, which is my right needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and this first one that we call plain stitch in arm knitting is basically stockinette stitch. I'm going to make sure the yarn goes front to back over my thumb, pull off the loop and drop it, and twist the yarn so the working yarn is towards the front as we go across. As you get a rhythm, you don't have to incorporate your thumb in every stitch, but when you're getting the hang of things, it's good to remind yourself which way the yarn is going. All right, so I'm moving the loops from my right arm to my left. The working yarn is going front to back over my thumb. And when I drop the loop, I'm twisting it so the working yarn is towards me. So this is plain stitch. For you guys, it's stockinette stitch. And you're going to have the stockinette side is going to be towards you, the smooth side of the work is going to be towards you, and the reverse stockinette, the knotted side, is going to be away from you. Going back in the other direction, it's the same stitch. Over the thumb, pull it off and drop it, twist it so the working yarn is in the front, and move it across. You can't really tension your yarn in arm knitting like you might with regular knitting. What I do, and you can see as I'm moving along, I have a tendency to just snug up each stitch just a little bit after I do it. Remember, the height of the stitch is going to be the width of your wrist. So you want the stitches to be as even as possible, and you kind of want to be them as tight as possible so the fabric tightens up. But you can't make them too tight, as I said, because you'll hurt your wrist, and you don't want to make them too loose, though, because then the fabric won't have any kind of body. So I'm just going back and forth. I'm going to put one more row on so you can see what's going on. So this is the stockinette stitch, or plain stitch as we call it in arm knitting. If you need a little more slowed down version, you can go to the plain stitch video. Okay, and there we have it, just a plain stockinette stitch. As you can see, there's no twist in the stitch at all. It's just a nice, neat stockinette with the right side of the work towards us and the wrong side of the way. Now, because these stitches are so loose, sometimes we like to do a twisted stitch. So, like a twisted stitch in knitting, it looks like stockinette stitch, but the legs of the stitch are crossed. Now, to do that in arm knitting, we're going to use the same mechanics we already did, but instead of putting the yarn away from us over the thumb, we're going to bring it towards us over the thumb, pull the loop off, and put it onto the left hand without twisting. So when we did stockinette stitch, we twisted when we put the loops on, and that put the twist in the, that took the twist out of the stitch. But right now what we want to do is we want to leave the twist in the stitch. So we're going to keep the working yarn towards us at all times. It never moves. Now, as I'm moving along, what you can see is that the wrong side of the work, the knotted side of the work, is towards me in twisted stitch when it was away from me in stockinette stitch or plain stitch. So, twisted stitch, you would call it twisted stitch whether you were a knitter or not. Going back the other direction, same thing. Back to front, over, pull the loop off and drop it. And from here on out, the yarn is going to be over the thumb from back to front. The working yarn is always towards you in this stitch, never away. Okay, working yarn towards you, no twist when you're putting the loops on, and that puts the twist in the stitch. Now you can't see it as you're going on because what's essentially the wrong side of the work is towards you, the smooth side is away from you, but I'll show you in just another row or two. Okay, one more. Okay, so if you look at the work, oh, we got a fuzzball. So we saw the stockinette stitch right here. There's the plain side of the stockinette, right? The stitch just goes like that. If you look, I kind of had to flip it over the other way, but if you look here, you can see the legs of the stitch are crossed. So in this twisted stitch, we still have a smooth side and a knotted side, but on the smooth side, the knit stitches are twisted. It makes the stitch draw up a little bit. It's ever so slightly tighter, gives you a little firmer fabric. What if I wanted to do garter stitch? We call that knotted stitch in arm knitting. All I would have to do is alternate one row of plain stitch and one row of twisted stitch. So one row of stockinette stitch, one row of twisted stitch. Since I just finished a row of twisted stitch, let's go back in the other direction in plain, in which I'm going to bring the yarn over from front to back, pull the loop off, and twist it. Twist it. Okay, so now in the plain stitch, in the stockinette stitch, remember the twist is in the mechanics of putting the yarn on. It is not showing up in the stitch. So there's my stockinette row. And now going back the other direction, whoop, I'm a little tangled here. Back in the other direction. Okay, and remember, since we did stockinette, the knots are away from us. Now I'm going to do a row of the twisted stitch coming back to front towards the body and not twisting the fabric. And then this way, the knots are towards us. Okay, so we did one row of twisted. Now we're going to do one row of stockinette or plain. Okay, and let's go back one more time. Going to do a row of twisted. Okay, so as you can see, this gives us our garter stitch. We have ridges on this side, and we have ridges on that side. It looks just exactly like garter stitch. Once again, it gives you an even tighter fabric than the twisted stitch. And of course, one of the things about arm knitting is the stitches are very large and loosey-goosey, so this will just help you tighten things up. Another way to tighten things up, of course, is to use more strands of yarn than 3. I've been using 3 in the course of these videos, but you could use 4, 5, 6, or 20 to get a more dense fabric. So I'm going to work in plain stitch to get back to my left arm, because the one thing I want to show is a very plain, very simple increase. Now, generally, the easiest way to do this is on the right-hand side of the fabric. And all you're going to do is a cable cast on. So in this example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches, and I want 8. And so I'm simply going to do a cable cast on. I'm going to use my fingers and go between the first stitch and the second stitch. I'm going to pick up the working yarn, pull it through, and I'm going to put it on the left hand, on my left arm, or essentially the left hand needle. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I'm going to go ahead and knit them off in plain stitch as we've been doing. Remember, I've sort of switched back to stockinette stitch for the purposes of showing increasing and decreasing. So I'm just going to go ahead and get it back on my left arm. And I'm going to show that cable cast on one more time. But it is just like a cable cast on in knitting. And if you need to check out the video here, it's simply called increasing. Okay, so I'm going to use my fingers. I'm going to go between the first stitch and the second stitch. So I'm going to stick my fingers in there. I'm going to grab up the working yarn, pull through a loop, and put it on my left hand to give me one more stitch. And then when I'm working all my stitches from the left back to the right, I'm going to go ahead and work it off like a regular stitch. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think it might be a little easier to see if I move the work. You see how quick this goes? Just in the course of this video, we've done almost a whole scarf. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back on my left hand so I can show you the decrease. I'll tell you something else that arm knitting is great for, particularly if you have partials. As I was saying earlier about using 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 12, 29 strands of yarn, it's a really great way to get rid of those orphan skeins you have in your stash and you're not quite sure what to do with. It's really terrific use for them to find 5 or 6 that go together and just do a quick arm knitted scarf out of it. Even if you did one wrap and sewed it together in a Mobius, you know, if you've got partials to the tune of maybe 30 yards a piece, you could really get a beautiful scarf out of it that would be one of a kind because it would use up yarn that you already know you like. All right, for the decrease, it is literally essentially a knit two together decrease. Again, we're still working in plain stitch, bringing my yarn from front to back over my thumb, and instead of taking one loop off, I'm going to take two. And that's all there is to that. We're going to go ahead and work the loops off as we've been doing, but any place that you want to decrease, and it doesn't have to be an edge for the decrease, it can be anywhere. You can have fully fashioned decreases if you're going to town and trying to make an arm knit garment. But all you have to do is essentially knit two together. So when you want to pull one loop off another, pull two instead of one and you will decrease. Here, we'll do it on the other side just for giggles. Okay, so we're going to go back. We're working in plain stitch, so we're going front to back. Instead of pulling one loop off, pull two. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we're down to 7, 6, 7. Okay, for the bind off, it's very simple. It's a knit two together bind off. Again, I guarantee you if you've been knitting for any length of time, you've done this bind off. So you're going to do the first 2 stitches the way we've been doing. When you have 2 stitches on your right arm or your right hand needle, pull the first one over the second one and let it drop. So we're going to work across the way we've been doing. Knit a stitch, pull the first stitch over the second stitch. Knit a stitch, get it over there, pull the first stitch over the second stitch, and etc. All the way across until all the stitches are bound off. And also, as you would in knitting, all you need to do at the end is cut the yarn, pull it through, snug it up. All right, for those of you who already know how to knit, that's arm knitting highlights. Feel free to look at any of the other videos if you need to go on anything in any kind of detail, but this way you've got the language that you already know to help you pick up some quick arm knitting tricks. Please visit us at www.armknitting.com for more information, and you can get all kinds of terrific projects in simple and stylish arm knitting from design originals written by yours truly, and that's also available for purchase on armknitting.com. That's ARM-KNITTING.com. Thanks for dropping by.